I want to start out by just talking about how I came to do what I'm doing. This is something I'm talking about God and the way He interacts with us. And I know, without knowing anything about anybody in this room, the fact that you're here. Of course, you never say never in medicine, or you never say always. But I know that the majority of people in this room right now, we've all got a tremendous amount in common. And one of the things that we have in common is that we want to know the absolute truth. And we are willing to forego anything to obtain the absolute truth. And as you're aware, there's not every human being is constructed that way. There are only certain people that are constructed that way. There are other characteristics that we all share. If you really look at yourself, I'll bet you that the majority of you, when you are lined up in your family, you've been the one that's just a little bit on the fringe in your family. I also know that the majority of you have an overwhelming sense of responsibilities, an overwhelming sense of being responsible to God, to yourself, and to your family. I know that there's a great proportion of you who, there are actually books written about us. We're called the family crucible. We love our family. We love our relationship so much that we would lay our lives down for them. And then not every human being constructed that way. Another thing about the majority of us, and that is that we have a tremendous sense of internal sense of being unworthy, a tremendous sense of not measuring up, a tremendous potential to become perfectionists, because we're approval-seeking people. We like people to like us, and we will be used as a dish rag just so that people approve of us, and we'll allow that to happen. So there are a lot of these common characteristics that go on. And we're going to be addressing those throughout this time. But some of those are very advantageous. I would choose to think that the majority of those are great gifts. If you utilize those in the right and proper perspective, they can also be great detriments. And I will tell you about the great detriments, because if anybody has lived life from one extreme to another, it's me. And this isn't a course about I want to tell you about how I live my life. I want you to live just like that. I'm telling you the exact opposite. I can tell you about how you shouldn't live your life, because I've done it and it's killed me. And I don't want any of you to have the same result that I have. Literally, kill myself for working as a workaholic. So with those characteristics, I'll go one other step and call me a heretic if you want to. But I then just analyzed the personality characteristics of the chosen 12. And you know, I think that these characteristics that I just labeled off there, that I saw a lot of heads nodding, and yeah, I can identify with that, yeah, I can hit that on there. I think Jesus chose people that have the same characteristics that we all have, to be the ones that we imparted this information to the very beginning. So I totally believe that, and I hope you believe that, and incorporate that into your concept of who you are, because I'm totally convinced that is true. There are a lot of cold-hearted people in the world today, and we're not in that crowd. We're physical, and we're very pliable. Therefore, God has given us an opportunity to obtain this information so that we can incorporate it into our belief, because everything operates on what we know and what we believe. And that's why I'm going through all the things that I'll be going through here, because if you don't believe, and I can, I just as an example, I can say, how many of you believe in evolution? And I'm sure there maybe the hands go up. But I'm here also to tell you that the theory of evolution has had a profound impact on every single person in this room. It's been enculturated into us Our belief system is deep down in our midbrain, deep down in our right hemisphere. We'll get into this, but I know exactly anatomically where it is. And these belief systems, unless they're totally changed and eradicated, will continue to dominate our lives. And those are limiting factors. It's like that board that all of these props, and I'll go through and just give you a brief explanation of them, but these props are the way that God has imparted this information to me. And just on this board over here, this is the flow of faith through the human body. Faith is information and energy that flows through our body. And wherever you see a red clamp, those are obstacles to the free flow of faith. God is real in our lives. And those red clamps are put on there by our lives, by our families, by our culture, by ourselves, by false scientific doctrine, and by false religious doctrine. And the only people that can take those clamps off are you and I. And that's what this whole thing is all about, is how to remove those clamps so that we have the free flow of faith through our lives that God intended for us. So how did some goofball like me get involved in this? I'm least likely to be standing in the church reading this talk. When I was a little kid, I was walking home from school one day, and I think I was about 5th grade. This lady pulled up in the car, and she said, roll the car down, the window down, and said, Mark, I'll give you a ride home. And I looked in the car and I said, well, no, thank you, I'll walk. And I was about 2 miles from home. I said, no, I'll walk. She said, well, why do you want to walk? And I said, well, my mother told me never to ride with a stranger. And she said, well, Mark, I'm your Sunday school teacher. I wasn't raised in church or in Sunday school or the conventional way that Christians are quote-unquote Christians are raised. I wasn't raised with religion. I come from a very excellent family, all of which came to know the Lord in their lives as a result of sequence of events. But I wasn't raised that way. So I'm the least likely to be in the church. But as a little kid, and I know there's some of you, not all of you, will identify with this, God begins to speak to us, and this is going to be the substance of a lot of what I talk about in this series, is how to recognize the voice of God. God speaks to humanity. He speaks to individuals. He's continually giving us information. And we're missing that. I shouldn't say, speak for you, I'm speaking for myself. I'm missing 98% of the time in my life because I wasn't sure of how he spoke, how to listen to God. And he uses, if you throw the body and the soul out, you know, we're three-part beings. We're spirit, soul, and body. And if you throw the soul and the spirit and the body out, and a lot of conventional religion has thrown the body and the soul away, because they associate that with the flesh. And yes, the flesh is the source of sin. But our soul and our body are extremely important. God gave us a physiology. He gave us a molecular biology through which he runs his spirit. And we'll never understand how God works. We don't understand our soul and our bodies. So that's what we're doing. We can't throw it away. But God began to speak to me as a little bitty kid. I knew that God had a job for me, and it was to be a physician. And my dad was a family physician. And at first I thought, well, I'm just copycatting my dad. I see what he does, and I admire him and love him, wanted his approval, so that's why I'm doing it. But it wasn't that. Even before all those things even came into my mind, as a little kid, I had a mission. I was a man on a mission, and it was to be a physician. And talk about a million miles away from not only God, but I was a million miles away from anything like that at all, because I had a learning disability. And here I had this internal sense of being directed to do something with my life that I was concrete on. I mean, I knew it. It was one of those things that you know that you know that you know. It's not the kind of thing I ever told anybody about for a great number of years. But I knew that's what my mission was. And I knew that because of God's voice in my life. And I thought to myself, as I was going through school and getting B's and F's, and every single end of every school years, teachers would meet with my parents, and I'd go in with them, and they'd say, well, you know, Mark, he just doesn't get reading, he can't retain, he can't comprehend, we think he ought to hold him back. And for social reasons, in a small town, I never got held back. When I graduated, the bottom 25% of my high school class. I mean, I barely got through high school. And the guidance counselors told me that I shouldn't even apply to college because I would get frustrated. And in my frustration, I would just quit and be discouraged and leave. But I had that knowledge in me that God had this plan for my life. And I disobeyed them all of their advice, and I went to college. And the first semester, I took chemistry and geography, 2 science courses I took. And I studied for 58 hours for my first chemistry test. You imagine studying for 58 hours for one test. I thought, how in the world would anybody make it to college? 58 hours. How was it? And I flunked it. 58 hours. The next week I had a geography test. I took geography because I thought I was going to be Crayolas filling in the stuff on the map. But it didn't turn out to be that way. And geography was tough. I studied for 22 hours for my first geography test and flunked it. And I thought, man, man, I think I must have misread God somewhere along the way. And I went into the course and talked to my professor, and he just said that you have to pay attention, you have to listen, you have to rewrite your notes, and make your notes your textbook. That's what his advice was. So I went home and I started making my notes my textbook. Long story short, in that first semester, I went from straight F's, being on the dean's list, because God showed me how I could retrain my brain. I'm telling you, I could not comprehend. I'd never read a book in my life before I got to college. And here I was starting to have to read books. And what I found out was that if I wrote down, as I heard what was being said in lecture, and I wrote it down, and in my notes, and I scribbled as much scribbling as I could, and I would take that information home, and as soon as I could, after that class, I would review it, and I would rewrite those notes and organize them. And I take every single word. I never realized what my learning disability was. And I've worked with a lot of kids since that time with learning disabilities. And every single one of them has the same problem I have. And that is when I look at a word, it doesn't immediately register as an image in my mind. I don't make pictures out of words. Hence, all of these images up there. Because I got to see it. If you don't see it, you can't believe it. If you can't believe it, you won't live it. So you have to be able to see it. So I started drawing pictures and drawing graphs and drawing all kinds of things to make these words come to life. And then I started, when I was reading, I started noticing that if I said the word out loud, it went in my ears and it registered in my brain. If I read it silently, it was right in here, right up there in my head. It never stopped. So God showed me that you have to see it, you have to hear it, you have to say it, and you have to write it. And the body, when you write something, the human body has a memory to it. Our muscles, our ligaments, our tendons, our bones, our physical bodies have memory to them. It's called procedural memory. Highly studied. You ever go to the telephone and forget somebody's number and sit there and think, what is that number? And say, well, I can remember what the number is, but I'll just start dialing it or start punching it in, and all of a sudden your fingers start walking through the number and it just rattles it right off. Your brain didn't remember that, your body remembered it. So there's all of these things are available to us to improve our retention and improve our comprehension. So I spent all my college and all my medical school in the library, and I would speak. When I was reading out of my textbooks, I was saying the words into my ear so that I could hear them. Of course, I didn't know the Lord all this time, but He was guiding and directing me into all of these techniques. And it's only been in recent years that I realized that this is exactly what the Bible tells us to do. It tells us to listen. It tells us that the most important thing, faith, comes by what? Hearing. And what happens when you heard it? How did you hear it? Somebody had to say it. So you see it, you speak it, you hear it, and you write it. You put all those together, and this little organ up here, 3 pounds of mush, that is the most sophisticated, complex organism in the universe, will grab a hold of it. It's God's gift to humanity. That's the residence through which God does all of His phenomenal work through us. And every single neuroscientist, every single theologian, every single person I've ever read or listened to, when asked the question, what are the limits to the human brain? What are the limits to human memory? What are the limits to human comprehension? What are the limits to human understanding? And the answer is always the same. It is so, our potential is so vast that there are no limits to it. And there are none. We all have an unlimited potential. We're just not utilizing what it is that we have. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Is that I want to show you how to use this organ God has given us so that we can manifest what He has intended for us to manifest in our lives and for the world thereafter. With that technique, I made it through college, and there was one course that drove me to my knees, and it was physics. And with the first semester of physics was Newtonian physics. The things that you could see, it was studying the planets and the laws of physics that control things that you could see. And that I didn't have any problem with. But when we got to the semester of nuclear physics and electricity and magnetism, we're talking about things you can't see. I had no drawings. I had no way to make anything that resembled it. And we had 3-hour exams. And I flunked all 3-hour exams. And I was going into the final exam, my junior year of college. Now, a 5-credit course in science at that time, right in the middle of the Vietnam War. And I tried to get in the military before I ever went into college. I wanted to go to the military. But I got rejected for a physical reason. So I wasn't going to college to get out of the military. There were a lot of people who did, but I wasn't one of them. But one slip up on a 5-credit science course, you can kiss medical school goodbye. I mean, it's a goner. In those days, 50% of my medical school class had PhDs. And I didn't have a PhD, so I didn't know if I was ever going to get into medical school or not. But here I was with this physics exam. Physics, the final was coming up. And I thought, how am I going to do this? And I had no way to talk to the people. I mean, at that point in time, my life was totally based on the fact that I was giving myself credit for all my academic success. I was giving myself credit for everything that I accomplished. It was all because of my dedication, my work ethic, my, whatever. And patting myself on the back. And then this physics came along. At the same semester, I was taking organic chemistry, which was supposed to be the toughest course of my junior year. And the day before I went into my physics last class, I went into organic chemistry. There were 400 kids in our organic chemistry class, and the professor said, I'm exempting one student in here from taking the final exam. He's got the highest recorded record of any student I've ever had in organic chemistry. And I'm looking at all these smart people sitting around me, and I wonder who that is. And he said, I'm going to name his name off, and I want him to stand. And he read off out of his grade book, Mark Bishop. And I just about fell out of my chair. I couldn't believe it. And I walked out of that class, the top out of 400, into my physics class, where I had 3 Fs going into the final. Well, I was exempted from my organic chemistry final, so that gave me time to study for my physics test. So I started studying like crazy, and I studied everything I could. But the whole time I was studying, I think, I'm not doing anything different now than I did when I took the exam and flunked it. I don't know how this is going to work. And I got through the night before my final exam. I got through and I was looking over all my materials. I was looking at all my self-help books and every drawing and everything I'd ever constructed, trying to get this information in my head. And I thought to myself, is there anything that I forgot? Because if I go down in flames, I want to at least know that I have expended every ounce of effort in this endeavor. And I looked over my desk and all those piles of books and everything, and said, there's not one thing I have forgotten. And I leaned back and stretched my back, and I looked up to the ceiling in this little study room I was in, and I thought, I wonder if there's something outside of me that might be helpful in this situation. Because I know that what's inside of me has got 3 F's. I need something outside of me. And I thought to myself, I wonder if there's a God up there. I hadn't thought about God ever in a personal way. And I thought, I wonder if there's a God up there. And I thought, well, if there's a God up there, man, I need him now. And I literally, of course, in my totally solid room, got down on my knees and I prayed. I said, if you're up there, God, and I don't have any idea if I'm talking to somebody or myself, but if you're up there and if you allow me to get an A or a B in physics, I know I'll get into medical school because my grade point is high enough. And I will dedicate my medical practice to you. That was a commitment I made. So I went into physics final the next day and I got a good solid B and I got into medical school and got all the way through. And was an honor medical student and received the highest academic honor given in medicine. The Alpha Omega Alpha Honor Medical Society. And all of those academic honors, well, of course, I forgot my prayer real quick and started patting myself on the back. But that was my interaction with God. Well, then when I got out into medical school, I started noticing people living and dying, people going from ability to disability, and people with equal illnesses. Why does one person live and one person die? What's going on here? I kept asking my professors, what is it that goes on in humanity that makes a difference between life and death? Because I've looked at these people's charts and there's not any big difference in their numbers. I mean, everything looks equal, but one person lives and one person dies. And the only answer I ever got was it's either Father Time or Mother Earth that's doing this. It's Father Time and Mother Earth. Nobody had an answer for me. But I was convinced that there's something intangible going on in humanity that I didn't have my finger on. Well, I got out of my medical training and everything, and got through my family practice residency and all that. I got an opportunity to live my greatest desire, and that was to go to Wisconsin Medical School, where my dad had gone, and I would spend a tremendous amount of time at the VA hospital. And Carolyn, there you go. Just found out Carolyn was the head nurse in surgery at the VA hospital in Madison when I was in medical school. But the guy who was the head of the VA hospital in Madison, his name was William S. Middleton. The hospital was named after him. William S. Middleton Veterans Administration Hospital. He was the head of all forces and Army forces in European theater of World War II. He was President Eisenhower's personal physician. He's an internationally known internal medicine specialist, had written dozens of books on physical diagnosis, and was for a world-renowned guy. And he was the dean of medical school. My dad went there. So when I went to medical school, I thought, Dr. Middleton was my guy. I mean, he was the guy for a lot of medical schools because he was the top of the line. And Dr. Middleton would treat the medical students very harshly. If he thought you were moving off, he would shoot you up and spit you out, and everybody was in fear and trepidation over Dr. Middleton. Well, I found out that one of the intangible things that I saw affecting humanity was laughter. And I love to have fun. So I would go around, I'd get to the hospital at least an hour before anybody else did, and I'd just go from room to room, making my social rounds, just talking to guys that were at the VA hospital. They were all away from home, they were lonely, and they needed somebody to talk to. So I'd go and talk to them, tell them to go, and pat them on the back. And before you know it, I noticed my business was all getting better, and everybody else was fine. And what's going on here? So I had gone to the state fair that year, and this was the gimmick at the state fair, this fictitious dog. And I thought, man, this really looks neat. So I took this to the VA hospital when I was on surgery. And I went down the hallway with this one morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the resident, the intern, grabbed me by the back of the neck and said, Middleton catches you with that, your history, you'll be kicked out of here. You won't remember something like that. And I thought to myself, how in the world would Dr. Middleton not get a kick out of something like this? It's pretty simple. So I thought, well, I'm going to throw caution to the wind. So I started walking down the hallway, and I'm just about to enter the first room, and I hear Dr. Middleton's voice from 40 rooms down this long hallway, speaking in his usual military talk, Bishop, halt, front and center. Well, I had my back going like this, so I did an about-face, was standing there with my dog out here, and he came walking down this long hallway, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, how am I going to explain this to myself, my wife, my dad, everybody else? I need to kick out of that school. I thought, well, I'm going to go out and go out with my blades, so I just kept shaking this thing. He came up to me, and he looked me right square in the eyes, and I looked him right back in the eyes, and he looked down at this thing, and he looked at me again, and he said, let me see that. And he grabbed this thing out of my hands, and he grabbed it, and he starts doing this, and he was going like this. He was going up and down. I said, Dr. Milton, that ain't the way this thing works. You got to do it sideways. Dog wag their tail like this, not like this. So he said, well, show me. So I got my arms around Dr. Milton, showing him how to use this dog. Everybody is in the hallway is splitting the gut laughing. He's showing Dr. Milton how to use this thing. So he gets it down, and then he hands it back to me, and I'm sitting there with him again like this, and he's standing there at attention looking at me, and I didn't know what he's going to say next. So I thought, well, here goes my last effort. So I let my dog drift over Dr. Milton's leg, and I tipped it to the side. I tipped it to the side as the dog is relieving himself on Dr. Milton's leg, and he grabbed it out of my hands and said, well, that's what I wanted to know. I said, I'll see you later. And he starts walking down the hallway. I said, well, what are they doing with my dog? And he said, I'm going to take it to the rest of the hospital. And I never saw him again the whole rest of the day. Well, about 5 o'clock that night, I got paged over the intercom. Bishop report to Dr. Middleton's office. I go, oh, what happened? So I go into Dr. Middleton's office, and he has this just like this in his hands. He said, Bishop, I'm returning to you your instrument of healing. So he understood and fully appreciated back in those days the importance of the intangibles in medicine and how important that was. And I can't even tell you how godlike Dr. Middleton was, and his legend still is at the University of Wisconsin. It's huge. For just a few days later, I was going up and down the hallway one morning making my rounds, and then later Dr. Middleton came to make rounds with all of us. There's a point there. And you know how doctors have this entourage of 8 or 10 medical students, interns, and residents. We were all in this covey of 12 coming down the hallway with Dr. Middleton. And this one little guy that had been in the hospital for about 3 weeks came up with his slippers and his house coat on. He just stood there and just looked at Dr. Middleton, right in the middle of his lecture for us medical students. And it was kind of annoying to Dr. Middleton. Finally said to this fellow, he said, what can I do for you, soldier? And this patient said, well, who's my doctor? And Dr. Middleton said, I'm your doctor. I'm everybody's doctor in this VA hospital. And Dr. Middleton said, and why do you ask? And the guy said, because I want to change doctors. And Dr. Middleton said, and who, pray tell, would you want to be your physician? And this little guy said, Dr. Bishop. Well, if Dr. Middleton taught a medical student calling himself a doctor, number one, I mean, you're out of there. You don't do that. And here this guy referred to me as Dr. Bishop. I thought, oh my goodness, I'm out of this. Anyway, I thought to myself, this implicates and is a first illustration of the importance of a relationship. I mean, Dr. Middleton, this guy was brilliant. And for this little guy to come up and say, I want to change doctors, someone that knew the least of anybody on the floor that day, he wanted me to be his doctor, but only because he had a relationship with me. He knew that I cared about him. He knew that I believed in him, and he knew that I'd stick with him. The importance of relationship. The last story I want to tell you about, this is another very important point. This patient came in one day, a great big, huge guy. Came in from northern Wisconsin, came in with all the signs of congestive heart failure, and he came into the hospital, and the intern, the resident, the staff guy, and the third-year medical student, me, fourth on the list, examined this guy. And the next day, Dr. Middleton was coming to make rounds, and he would always quiz everybody, what did you find on this patient? And he really quiz you tightly on what you found. Well, everybody found the same thing as far as the heart and the lungs and all of those things about congestive heart failure. But during the course of my exam, I was following the book. The book says if you have trouble examining somebody's abdomen, shine a light tangentially across the abdomen, and you can see every movement in the abdomen. So I went and got a light, sparked up a light, and I shined it on this man's abdomen, and I could see this guy has got a pulsating mass in his abdomen. It's an abdominal aortic aneurysm, and I measured it was 9 centimeters. So when we had our night rounds that night, everybody was comparing what they found, and I said, yeah, I did all that too. And they said, did you find anything else? I said, yeah, I found a 9 centimeter abdominal aortic aneurysm. Well, everybody instantaneously broke out in laughter, because you can't feel a 9 centimeter abdominal aneurysm. Somebody with a belly out in there, you can't feel it. Well, I didn't feel it either, but I saw it. I used to look at it, I could see it. Well, they all said, oh, Bishop, there's no way in the world this guy's got a 9 centimeter abdominal aortic aneurysm. So the next thing, Middleton came to make rounds, and he, of course, walks into this man's room and asked me, the medical student, the lowest man in the totem pole, to present this patient. Well, I presented, and I did what I was told initially, told everything everybody else had found, and I just forgot about the aneurysm. And then he was eating it. I can't let this go by. It's potentially lethal problem. He died from a rupture that got my word aneurysm. So when I got all through presenting him, Dr. Middleton looked at everybody's eyes, and everybody was shaking in agreement. And then he said to me, as an afterthought, well, did you find anything else? And I thought, there's my chance. I said, yes, I did. I found 9 centimeters of abdominal aortic aneurysm. And Dr. Middleton got down and examined this guy's belly for about 15 minutes. And he said, I can't tell. We'll have to take an x-ray. So we went down to x-ray. This whole entourage of 50 people were on the x-ray. And everybody's waiting for me to get hung out and dry, because there's no way this guy's got 9 centimeters of abdominal aortic aneurysm. Well, the radiologist came out with the x-ray film, put it up on the x-ray box, and he said, what'd you find? He said, a 9 centimeter abdominal aortic aneurysm. I mean, by now, 100 people gathered around the x-ray room, just split like the Red Sea, and just like Moses, I walked right down the middle to shake Dr. Middleton's hand. But I knew that God was using that to prepare me for something. He was going to see under duress and under the possibility and potential for ridicule, are you going to stick to your guns? If you really believe in something, are you going to stick to it? And if you stick to it and you know what the truth is, you better stick to it. And I'll reward you for it. And he did. So relationship, humor, and sticking to your guns. So when I finally got all through with my medicine, I got back to my hometown and started practicing with my dad. And after about 2 years, I realized that there's something going on in humanity that I've never seen in medical school. In medical school, you see people for 2 or 3 weeks at the very most, and you don't have any kind of relationship with them. You don't know what they were before they came to the hospital or what happened afterwards. All you see is that little brief window of time. You don't really get an opportunity to observe the totality of life. Well, as I was observing life and watching people with diabetes and hypertension and heart attacks and strokes and multiple sclerosis, the myriad of things that you see as a family doctor, incidentally, I'm a family doctor. I take care of everybody from the cradle to the grave, and I normally don't keep statistics, but in my process of looking for a seminary to go to where I can study the spirit of man and God, I had every seminary I applied to ask me what kind of doctor I was. And I told them I was a medical doctor. And they said, well, are you a real medical doctor? I didn't know what they meant by that. So I gave them a list of things. I've delivered over 3,000 babies. I've done over 10,000 operations. I've taken care of 30,000 ICU patients, 25,000 ER patients, and over 500,000 outpatients. I don't know if that's a real doctor or not, but I've operated on every single organ in the human body except the inner ear, which is encased in bone. So that's who I am, and that's what God has allowed me to observe. And that is every single thing, every single body cavity, every nook and cranny inside mankind. I've been there with my eyes and ears and hands and fingers. So that's who I am. So when I came back to my hometown, just couldn't wait to start practicing medicine with love OB and doing C-sections and forceps deliveries and taking appendixes out and doing hernia operations and gallbladder operations. I was having the greatest time in the world until I realized that wasn't what was killing mankind. So there's something else going on in people's lives that after the appendix was healed, after they got over their pneumonia, I would start developing a relationship with people, and I would start seeing them in and out over a period of time. And I would begin to notice that there's something else going on here. So I started asking people after I got through taking the stickers out and looking at their charts and looking at all the numbers, how's your life? Are you satisfied with your life? Are you happy in life? Do you feel fulfilled in your life? And I was not prepared to begin to actually receive the kind of answers I was getting. I found out that almost nobody had total satisfaction or any kind of sense of meaning or purpose in their lives. People would break down in tears when I asked them how they felt, begin to probe their life in terms of their unresolved guilt and shame and things like that. They just broke down and completely answered. So I began to realize that there's some other factor here that is outside of the soul and the body that is influencing the totality of the soul and the body. What is it? Is there a spirit inside man? So I started meeting with people. So William Bolster, the father of modern medicine, said, listen to your patient. They're trying to tell you what's wrong with them. So I started coming in after office hours and talking to people and listening to them tell me what their problems were. And, the patients that were on dialysis, the people after their second coronary bypass operation, people rehabbing from strokes, babies that were born with congenital defects, genetic abnormalities, all of these things were going on. And I was trying to help people through all of this. And so I started asking people what it was that they were missing. I had one particular patient that exemplifies this as good as anything. She was a 46-year-old lady who had been diabetic almost all her life. And she had all the end-stage complications of her diabetes. She was on kidney dialysis. She had 2 coronary bypass operations. She was losing her vision. But she kept not thriving. She just wasn't doing well. Medically, all her numbers looked okay. But whenever I'd see her, there was always a sentiment of discontent or depression or despondency. And even when she was medically stable, there still was no vitality or life there. So I said, God, I said, what's going on in your life? What is it? You don't seem like you're happy at all. You don't seem like you want to live just one day. And so she broke down and started crying. She said, I don't. I said, well, what's the problem? And she said, there's no love in my life. There's no love in my family. She was having been diabetic all her life. She had one successful pregnancy. She had this child who was 13 years old at the time. And she was very distraught over the fact that he was coming through this family without a manifestation of love in their lives. So I said to her, I said, well, Martin, let me ask you this, in terms of trying to quantitate how important this is to you. You're on kidney dialysis, you had heart surgery, you're losing your vision, all these things. So if you had all these syringes with all these diseases lined up in front of you, plus a syringe that has the absence of blood in it, so if you had to give your son one of these, which would you most not want to give your son? Which would you most not want him to live with in the presence of? She said, well, you can live with diabetes, you can live with heart disease, you can live with visual dysfunction, you can live on kidney dialysis, but you can't live without love. But what is this thing called love? It began to blow me away. What in the world is this? So I started spending time with people, and over a period of 2 years, I kept track of the conclusions that people came to. And it was just, it was like a rubber stamp. I could tell you, when these people would come back and I'd ask them what it was that they were missing in their lives, every single one of them came back with the exact same 3 things. The first and foremost was that they didn't have unconditional love in their lives. Number 2 was they had no way of resolving their guilt and shame. So there was no forgiveness in their lives. And the third was there was no meaning and purpose in their lives. I thought, man, this is phenomenal information. If I can find something that contains love, forgiveness, and meaning and purpose, I can put it into a syringe, get it all diluted, and I'll have people circling the globe waiting to get their IV infusion of whatever it is that's missing. And I thought, what is it that's missing? It had escaped me. I couldn't believe it. I missed it. It was this important. So I literally, it was at a semester break at this time, in the winter months. I went to the university library, and I went with a shopping cart, and I started buying used textbooks. And I bought a textbook from every major endeavor in the study of mankind that I had not taken a course in, from anthropology, experimental psychology, dynamics of societies, histories of religion, and everything I knew nothing about, I started accumulating. And I started going through all of these books. And I studied and looked, and every single one of these disciplines, every single one of these human endeavors had come to the exact same conclusion. And that is that the need that mankind has, that's the greatest, is the need to love and to be loved. And every time I would come to that in a book, I couldn't wait to turn the page to find out where it's true. Everybody was coming up with what the deficiency was, but as soon as I turned the page to find out where you find it, it was blank. Nobody had an answer to it. And I was really searching and going, what in the world is the answer to this? Something that is universally needed. And I began to think, well, I'm a biologist, so how do we look at this in biological terms? So I began to think, okay, what about the physical reality of man? What about the physical life of man? The one thing that we all need is oxygen. If you take the oxygen out of this room, I don't care who you are, you can't survive. You're going to die. Human life needs oxygen. And I compared that oxygen to whatever it was I was looking for. And I began to look at the qualities of oxygen. What are the qualities of oxygen? Well, it's present in our environment. It's effortless. It's just here. It's just in our environment. It's handy. It's right available believe it has it. You don't have to work for it. It's all there. This is something you have to endeavor, dig, scratch, and find out. So I thought, well, what in the world can meet those three criteria? It has to be simple, it has to be free, and it has to be equally available to all. And it also has to have love, meaning and purpose, and forgiveness. Now, if I can interrelate those 6 factors, I have the answer to this greatest problem of mankind. So I was in the hospital one night. I just admitted a guy with a heart attack, and his pastor came in with me. And I had just delivered this pastor and his wife's baby, so I had kind of a personal relationship with Pastor Steve. And he asked if he could talk to me after I got through in the ICU. So I got this guy tucked away and he was stable. So I went to the emergency room, and this Pastor Steve wanted to talk to me. Well, I mean, I hadn't even been inside a church. I think it was for 15 or 18 years, as I recall. At that time, I thought to myself, the only time that I ever talked to a preacher is that most of them were condemning me for who I was and what I was, and I knew that I was a sinner. I didn't need to be convicted for that. And somebody tell me that, I already knew it. So I thought, I don't want to stand here 11 o'clock at night and get reprimanded for what I haven't been doing. This is going to be like pulling teeth without anesthesia or something. But I owed it to him, so I went back and I thought I would talk to him. And I thought, well, I'm just going to lay it right out as simple as I can with this pastor, so he doesn't deceive me with a bunch of condemnation. So he was standing there enthusiastic as could be, and I walked in. He said, Mark, you look like you're perplexed. And I said, yes, sir, I am perplexed. He said, well, what are you perplexed about? I said, well, I'm a biologist, and I have found a great contradiction, a great paradox in humanity. And that contradiction is that there's no living organism on planet Earth higher or more sophisticated or more integrated than the human organism. None. We are the highest, we're the top of the ladder, the top of the chain. But we are the only living organism that destroy ourselves. We're the only living organisms that willfully destroy ourselves. Of all the diversity of life on planet Earth, mankind is the only living organism that destroys itself. And at that time, there was some, I hated zoology, so I was familiar with the actions of lemmings. And you know, lemmings will jump off a cliff into the ocean and drown themselves. And biologists thought for years they were doing that as some kind of intentional suicide. But what they do is they feel social pressure to the point that they're going to run out of their food source, so they're jumping in the ocean to swim to new territory. So it's a survival means, it's not a willful destruction of their lives. So there's no other living organism that destroys itself but us in this room right now. We're the only living organisms that will willfully destroy ourselves. And that defies every major biological principle in every biology book I've ever looked at. So why is that? And I said, I told this pastor, I said, I know why. It's because we don't have love, we don't have forgiveness, and we don't have meaning and purpose. I said, I've concluded that here I am a physician. I'm treating hypertension, I'm treating diabetes, I'm treating alcoholism, I'm treating drug addiction, I'm treating divorce, I'm treating incest, I'm treating abuse, I'm treating abandonment. And all of these things that I'm treating are labeled as diseases by medical and social sciences. And none of these things are diseases. They're all side effects of a disease. And they're a side effect of their symptom of a disease. And the disease is the absence of love, the absence of forgiveness, and the absence of meaning and purpose in life. So I said, that's what I've concluded, and I don't have the answer for that, and I'm sure you don't either. I'll see you later. And I started walking down the hall. And he said, wait a minute. He said, let me show you this. And he pulled the little pocket Bible out of his front pocket. And he said, look at your Mark. And he turned to 1 John 4:8. He said, God is love. If you could have struck me with a bolt of lightning, I wouldn't have been as startled as I was when I heard that statement. God is love. Those 3 words literally transformed me. They totally stopped me dead in my tracks. Oh yeah, I arrested at one time too. It stopped me in a different way and dead in my tracks. God is love. You mean to tell me that humanity has a need for love? Now this is really evidence when you're talking to somebody who's a scientist. What's this got to do with molecules, DNA, transcription and translation, cell walls, mitochondria, biochemistry, the Krebs cycle? What's that got to do with any of that stuff? I didn't have any idea what to do with it, but I knew it. God is love. So then I said, well, that sounds good, God is love, but can you give me a definition of what love is? And as these people over these preceding 2 years were coming in and telling me that they were deficient of love in their lives, I would ask them, I'd say, okay, now the next assignment is I want you to go home and I want you to write down a definition in a one little simple paragraph. What is love? So people would bring these definitions. I had a whole desk full of them. And they would tell me that what they're wanting in their interpersonal relationships is that they're wanting kindness, they're wanting patience, they're wanting a lack of envy, a lack of jealousy, they're wanting loyalty, they're wanting trust, they're wanting these basic factors. So then as Pastor Steve said, well, here I'll read you the definition for love out of the Bible. 1 Corinthians 4:8. Love is patient and kindness, never jealous or envious, never boastful or proud. It's loyal. It defends the person, the object of the love. And every single characteristic that the Bible said is what people had told me that they were missing. I thought, man, this is really getting popular now. I mean, here God is love, and God, the definition for God is the definition for love. That's who He is. This is getting really unbelievable, Pastor Steve, I said, but, not everybody can read that book. There are people all over here who can't read a book. I couldn't read a book for a lot of years. How in the world am I supposed to get this? And I reported to him, I said, this God of yours is looking pretty good right now, but I'll tell you what I've observed as a family doctor, a little old country doctor, and that is that the single most profound thing in our lives has to do with our interpersonal relationships. We are products of our interpersonal relationships. Take all the complexities of our lives, and the core structure of our lives is most determined by the relationships we have in our lives. I mean, I saw it literally killing people. The dissension between a mother and a daughter, the dissension between a father and a daughter, the dissension between a husband and a wife, the dissension between the people that I thought were directed to have the most loving relationships on planet Earth, had the most destructive relationships on planet Earth. And I thought to myself, what a paradox, and what a tremendously difficult situation this is for all mankind. Here we need this love, and the relationships that we have, where we're supposed to be the object of this that we have, is being totally superseded. So I began to look for what is relationship. So I said to this pastor, if you will show me that God of yours didn't just present Himself in the form of this book right here, which not everybody can read, I had the stupidity to say this, honest. I said, if you can show me this guy, this God of yours, came down here in the form of a living human being, one that we could relate to, I'll believe it. I said, he did. I said, yes. What I said was, I'll be damned. And he looked at me and he said, yes, you will. And when my little God said that the first time, I said it 3 times. And finally, the last time I realized what I said. I said, I'll be damned. And I didn't realize that God damned myself. But yeah, I was damned all right. But when he told me who Jesus was, he was the living representation of God, the incarnation of God, in the form of a living human being, one that we could relate to. Man, I mean, this is tailor-made. I mean, any observer of humanity would have to have rocks in his head not to see this. I mean, this is so obvious that it's unbelievable with this little simple construct of ideas. I said, man, you mean I thought Jesus and God were at odds? I didn't know who Jesus was. I mean, I knew He was God, but I didn't know He was the same God as God. God, but I didn't know nothing about God's friend God. The only God I had was Dr. Middleton. And he liked dogs. So I didn't have any idea about this, but when he told me that Jesus was the incarnate God, I mean, it blew me away. I said, okay, so there's love. Jesus is love. God is love. He's in the form of a living human being. But what about shame and guilt? Because I see shame and guilt being the greatest source of affliction of mankind. It is the greatest source of affliction of mankind. So every single one of us in this room here have sustained an injury in one way or another to our being. And to a great extent, that injury is perpetuated by a feeling of unworthiness, worthlessness, and shame. It's the same shame that Satan put on man in the garden. It is the essence of the fall of man. Satan didn't give us drug addiction. He didn't give us alcoholism. He didn't give us heart disease. He didn't give us cancer. All he did was allow us to feel shame. And shame does every single thing that I've seen. Every single thing. I'll show you now to the molecular level that shame changes the molecular structure of the organism. Absolutely no question. It is what changes our genetic code. It's what turns our genes on and off. It's our sense of who we are and who God is. And when we don't have that relationship right, then we feel shame because of the fall of man. So here was this shame. I said, okay, Pastor Steve, how does God take care of that? He said, well, he took care of that through Christ, crucifixion. And, you know, first he could tell me the rest of the gospel, that's God's mechanism for resolving shame and guilt. It's just accepting by faith Christ's crucifixion. He took all of the things that Mark Bishop did last year, this year, and will do for the next 10 years, or how many years I live, hopefully 20 years. And he took all of those and nailed them to the cross. And that's the point. That is, all you have to do is accept that by believing by faith, and you're exonerated. You're completely free. You know, this is really getting good. And then I didn't know anything about the resurrection. And he told me that 3 days after he was crucified, he was resurrected back to life again. And that is our equally available to us. The resurrection power of Christ is equally available to us, not only in our lives, but also at the end of our physical life. That we become resurrected. We have eternal life. So you mean tell me that I'm living this physical life right now, and I've gone to all this school and doing all these things that I think are good things to do, but all of this, the most important thing I'm accomplishing right now is secure where I'm going to spend eternity. Can that be true? I said, yeah, that's true. And as I began to think about it, yeah, that fits with the story. Well, then they asked me if I wanted this thing. And I thought to myself, well, it's equally available to all, but it's free, it's so simple a child can understand it. When it fulfills the need for oxygen for our physical life, then Christ must be our spiritual oxygen. And he's right there available to us. So I accepted him that night in my life. And it immediately transformed me. And then the greatest way of transforming, when I was having my own personal greatest struggle with it, was that I couldn't love my 2 kids at the time. Every time I did something for my kid, I would have a string or 2 or 3 or 4 tied to it. And I would make them feel guilty for what I did for them. I'd buy them with this to pump a truck or whatever it was, and then I'd make them pay for it. Because it was something that I didn't have given to do, so I began to resent what I was doing. I thought, how in the world should I would say to myself, what are you doing this for? I mean, you just ruined this thing for this kid. I mean, you think I'd be an idiot. And I thought to myself, how can anybody get a degree like I've gotten, and all the education I've gotten, and I can't conquer that nature of mine, the one with strings on my life? What is wrong with me? And I realized I didn't have the capability to do that on my own. No matter how hard I tried. I mean, to tell you talk about trying hard. That physics exam, I tried as hard as any human being ever tried on anything to get that down, and it came to pass. But I could not overcome my nature of doing wrong when I knew full well what was right to do. I just couldn't overcome it. The instant I became a Christian, I went home and had to love my kids. I had a perfect example. I'd gotten out of my training and gone for years without an income. Finally, I had an income, and I went to the shoe store to buy a pair of shoes for my older son, and he wanted cowboy boots. And so I went to the store and bought him this $45 pair of cowboy boots. And I bought myself a $9 pair of second reject shoes. And I was really excited for him getting these new boots. After I got the boots, this is before I became a Christian, after I got him those boots, he took them home, and I kept reminding him every day of how much those boots cost compared to my shoes. Just making sure he knew how much I had spent over what I spent on myself, making him pay for those boots over and over. Finally, he brought the boots to me in a box and said, Dad, let's take these back. You ruined them for me. And I can remember to this day, my first that day that my dad brought me those cowboy boots, and I had the same opportunity to own them, and I blew it. So that never happened again. Because I was able to give without expecting something in return. So that love is paramount. And that love transcends our human physiology and our human biology. So that's how I came to know the Lord. Then the next thing is how do you implement this in your life? How does this play out in life? And how does this play out in our human anatomy and physiology? And that's what I'm going to explain to you this next hour. I'm going to give you an overview of what these 12 sessions are going to be about. I'm going to go to my models here and show you how to relate these biblical principles to what's going on in our human anatomy and our physiology. So that the strongholds of false doctrine and religions and the strongholds of false scientific doctrine can be dispelled. So that when you say you believe something, you know in the depths of your depths that you really do believe in it. Because it's absolutely true. The Bible is absolutely true. And all of the scientific information that is available today is great information. But if you take all that information away from a foundation of biblically based, grace-centered message from the Bible, it means absolutely nothing. It's just good academic information. It'll make you feel better for a few hours, but it's not going to transform your life. When you put those two things together, it's like taking sulfur and carbon and putting them together with potassium nitrate, which makes gunpowder, and you get an explosion. And that's exactly what happens in the human organism when you put these two things together. So if we want to take about a 10-minute break, we can do that right now. And you can go to the restroom and get cooled off and have a drink. We'll be back in about 10 minutes.